Russia is running out of time. For years, Vladimir Putin has built an empire of smoke and mirrors, feeding his people the lie that Russia is untouchable. But behind the curtain, his war machine is devouring the country from the inside out. The cracks are no longer just showing, they're splitting wide open. The economy is unraveling. The Kremlin is throwing every last ruble into the war, gutting hospitals, schools, and social programs just to keep the fight going. The workforce is collapsing. Millions have fled, hundreds of thousands have died, and factories are running out of hands to keep up with the demand. The money is running dry. Experts warn that by the end of 2025, Russia could be out of liquid reserves entirely. And when that happens, the real crisis begins. Putin has two choices: scale back the war or watch Russia fall into the abyss. But the real question is, how much longer can he keep bluffing before everything crashes down? Let's break it all down. Bloomberg Economics predicts Russia's economic growth will grind to a near halt in 2025, barely scraping 1%, down from an estimated 3.1% in 2024. The International Monetary Fund isn't much more optimistic, projecting just 1.3% growth. And even if Putin miraculously pulled out of Ukraine tomorrow, the damage is already done. Russia's economy is running on fumes. A collapsing workforce, stalled productivity, and restricted access to global markets have left it with almost no room for recovery. Even the Kremlin's go-to economic crutch, military spending, can't prop things up like before. Yet, inside of trying to stop the bleeding, Putin is doubling down. In 2025, Russia's total government spending is set to rise to 41.5 trillion rubles, $421 billion, a 5% increase from the previous year. And guess where most of that money is going? War. Military and security spending will eat up over 43% of the budget, with national defense alone claiming a record-breaking 13.2 trillion rubles, $134 billion, a staggering 22.2% jump from 2024. This is now the single largest line item in Russia's budget, accounting for nearly a third of all government spending. And here's the kicker: 85% of that defense budget is classified, hidden, off the books. But it's not hard to guess where the money is going: feeding the war in Ukraine. To keep its war machine going, Russia has doubled armored vehicle production, ramped up ammunition output fivefold, and diverted almost all drone manufacturing toward military use, gutting civilian drone programs by 90%. Military pensions and housing alone will swallow 25% of the budget, about $17 billion. But all this military spending comes at a price, and Russia's civilians are the ones paying it. Spending on healthcare, education, and public services is taking a massive hit, with planned funding dropping by 16% compared to last year. And businesses, they're struggling to survive. Essentially, there's little money left for anything outside the war effort. Struggling industries, coal, automotive manufacturing, housing construction, and non-food retail are all begging for state support, but there's just not enough to go around. Public sector workers, teachers, doctors, law enforcement are feeling the squeeze. Their wages are tied to official inflation figures, which the government claims are under control. But in reality, inflation is running wild. Official data reports inflation at 9.5% in December 2024, up from 8.9% the previous month. But independent research tells a different story. Romir, a Russian independent research firm, reported that the prices of essential goods skyrocketed by 22% in September alone. The Kremlin's numbers simply don't match the reality Russians face every day, and things are only getting worse. With state spending ballooning, especially on defense, the demand for goods and services far outstrips what Russia's struggling industries can produce. This means higher reliance on imports, which drives up demand for foreign currency and, in turn, fuels inflation. The Central Bank of Russia has been forced to hold interest rates at a staggering 21%, one of the highest in the world, and yet it's barely making a dent in the inflation crisis. Even when adjusted for inflation, the real interest rate sits around 10%, an extraordinarily high figure by global standards. And this is just the start. Food prices are expected to spiral even further in 2025, making life even harder for ordinary Russians. With wages for public sector workers stuck in place, people are being crushed under the weight of soaring costs. But hey, who needs food when you got tanks, right? But inflation isn't Russia's only problem. It's also running out of workers. Putin's war has gutted the workforce. Hundreds of thousands have been sent to die at the front, millions have fled, and the country's shrinking population isn't producing enough replacements. The result? A labor crisis that's hitting key industries, especially defense manufacturing, hard. Wages are skyrocketing, but it's not helping businesses. It's just making survival harder. In Kurgan, home to Russia's armored vehicle production, wages have shot up by 33%. The problem? There aren't enough workers left to even pay. Central Asian migrants could fill the gap if Russia wasn't so openly hostile toward them. Thanks to restrictive migration policies and widespread xenophobia, Moscow is effectively shutting out one of its only options for relief. Instead, the country is stuck with a labor shortage it can't fix, a workforce it can't grow, and wages it can't sustain. But even if Russia could find workers, how would it pay them? Because the real crisis is that the money is running out, fast. The war is bleeding Russian corporations dry, and the Kremlin is scrambling to keep the economy afloat. Its solution? Raiding the National Wealth Fund, NWF. But even that piggy bank is running dangerously low. The NWF has gone from $117 billion in 2021 to a meager $31 billion by the end of November 2024. If you take out the gold, that number drops even further. The days of Russia relying on this fund to cover its budget gaps are numbered. It certainly doesn't help that Russia is planning to spend over $130 billion on defense in 2025 alone. That's why experts predict that by the fall of 2025, Russia's liquid reserves will be completely depleted, which means budget cuts will be unavoidable. But that's not all. To keep the economy from fully collapsing, the Kremlin might be forced to revive Soviet-era practices like price controls and rationing. The Soviet sins are making a comeback, and it's a sign of just how desperate things have become. The rapid depletion of the NWF is partly thanks to Western sanctions that have prevented Russia from borrowing money abroad. Foreign debt has plummeted from $729 billion in 2023 to around $293 billion by September 2024. Exacerbating the country's financial woes. In late November 2024, the ruble suffered a sharp drop, plunging nearly 25% from its 2022 highs. By November 27th, it had crashed to 114 per US dollar, less than a penny per ruble. After emergency interventions, the central bank managed to pull it back slightly, but the damage was done. Of course, sanctions played a major role here when the U.S. blacklisted 50 Russian banks, including Gazprom Bank, a crucial player in Russia's currency markets. The ruble went into freefall. But that wasn't the only issue. The ruble also lost ground against the yuan, Russia's main alternative to Western currencies. Over the summer, Russian businesses and banks were already struggling to get enough yuan, a problem that only worsened as the ruble's decline made imports more expensive. Desperate to stop the bleeding, Moscow turned to familiar tactics, capital controls, foreign currency interventions, and sky-high interest rates. But these weren't magic fixes. The National Wealth Fund had already been drained to prop up the currency, leaving fewer resources for future bailouts. Interest rates were jacked up to 21% we just mentioned, squeezing businesses and consumers alike. And half of Russia's foreign exchange reserves remain frozen due to Western sanctions, limiting its ability to stabilize the currency. Sure, the ruble saw a brief rebound in early January 2025, clawing back to just under 100 per dollar. The finance ministry paused foreign currency purchases to ease pressure, and speculation about a potential Trump presidency fueled hopes of relaxed sanctions. But even with this temporary lifeline, the ruble remains in deep trouble. It simply doesn't have anything going for it. Foreign investments is non-existent, exports are constrained, and Moscow is running out of tools to keep its currency afloat. So, it's blow after blow after blow, each one chipping away at Russia's ability to sustain its war machine. As the renowned Swedish economist Anders Aslund puts it, at the risk of a financial crash rises, Russia's imperiled economy is about to pose serious constraints on Putin's war, But how? How does a shrinking labor force weaken Russia's ability to fight? How do empty coffers limit its war spending? How does inflation, hitting ordinary Russians hardest, affect support for the war? And most importantly, how long can the Kremlin keep the war machine running before the cracks become impossible to ignore? Let's answer all these questions. Russia's war machine runs on weapons, that much is clear. But the factories making these weapons are stretched to the limit. Industrial facilities are already operating at 81% capacity, with 73% of enterprises facing labor shortages. This is more than just an economic headache, it's a logistical nightmare. The domestic economy simply can't keep up with the state's insatiable demand for arms. Of course, it doesn't help that battlefield losses are outpacing production. Simply put, Russia is burning through weapons faster than it can replace them, forcing the military to dip into aging Cold War stockpiles. If this trend continues, experts suggest that by late 2025, Russia could start running out of key military assets entirely. We already mentioned that the Russian citizens couldn't have both guns and butter, but as things are going, Putin might soon not have enough guns either. Another thing Putin will run out of? Soldiers. Russia is bleeding troops at an unsustainable rate. Between February 24, 2022 and January 29, 2025, Moscow lost over 834,670 soldiers in Ukraine, according to the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces. That's an astonishing figure that would cripple most armies. To compensate, Putin has ordered yet another expansion of Russia's military, raising the number of active servicemen to 1.5 million. But where is the money for this coming from? Expanding the army isn't just about numbers. It's also about funding, training, and equipment, all of which require a budget that Russia doesn't have. That's why military expert Dara Massakat questions whether the Kremlin can even afford this expansion while keeping weapons production somewhat afloat. Remember, the numbers don't lie. Putin has already ordered 3 troop increases since the invasion. First, he added 137,000, then another 170,000, then came the 300,000-man mobilization in 2022, which sent tens of thousands of draft-age men fleeing the country. Now he's promising the world's second-largest standing army, even though Russia can barely maintain the one it already has. The numbers might not lie, but Putin has no issue doing so. As always, the Kremlin is right behind Putin, insisting the Russian forces will rely on volunteers. But as economic conditions worsen and inflation erodes real wages, the appeal of military service shrinks, not grows. And without enough incentives, whether financial or ideological, how does Russia sustain this massive army? Throwing more bodies at the front isn't a strategy. It's a sign of desperation. Still, Putin has managed to hold the line this far by squeezing every last ounce of life out of his economy. But crucially, the Russian people have continued to support his war effort. According to a recent survey by the independent polling agency Levada, more than 3/4 of Russians are still backing the war effort, even as their economy falters. In fact, a growing minority of 39% of Russians even believe that using nuclear weapons could be justified in certain conditions. This reflects the degree to which the state has manipulated public perception to maintain this support. That support, however, is built on a fragile foundation. Putin can keep going for now because his control over the narrative and his suppression of dissent have kept public anger in check. But this won't last. The rising costs of war are simply too much for Russia to sustain indefinitely. Yes, Putin has made significant tax hikes and price increases a cornerstone of his strategy to keep the war machine churning. But this comes at a high cost. It's draining the pockets of regular Russians who can only tolerate so much before the pressure becomes unbearable. Inflation is pushing ordinary citizens to the brink, while the military losses and endless mobilization are adding fuel to the fire. For now, fear is still stronger than frustration. However, this dynamic will eventually shift. The same inflation, loss of life, and economic collapse that Putin can ignore today will bite harder tomorrow. The ultimate collapse of Russia's economy isn't a question of if, it's a matter of when. Once the Russian public reaches its boiling point, the entire structure of Putin's war machine will unravel. But don't expect this unraveling to happen in 2025. Alexandra Prokopenko of the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center explains why. The economy may struggle, but it's not yet bad enough to force an immediate end to the war. In the short term, Russia still has enough resources to sustain its campaign in Ukraine, perhaps in part because it's playing a dangerous waiting game, hoping that Western resolve weakens before it's too late. But beyond 2025, the writing is on the wall. Rising inequality, a decline in quality of life, and the constant strain of war will start to fray the social contract. Vasily Astrov, a senior economist at the Vienna Institute, has warned of a wave of bankruptcies which could send the country into a tailspin if left unchecked. As for the long-term consequences, Russia is likely heading toward an economic trap. The model it's currently running on, driven by military spending, rampant inflation, and reliance on a shrinking workforce, will only worsen as time goes on. Though a dramatic collapse akin to the 1990s might not be in the cards, the country is undoubtedly headed toward a slow, grinding stagnation. It may not be the sudden burst of collapse, but the unavoidable decay will wear down the country's ability to maintain its war effort. In a few years, when Russia can no longer fund its military adventures or even keep its domestic economy from sliding into further chaos, the war in Ukraine may very well become the tipping point that brings Putin's entire regime down. Now, we know that in a few years isn't exactly the hopeful timeline many are wishing for. The hard truth is, it might take longer than some would like to see Russia's collapse fully unfold. However, it's also worth noting that the West, spearheaded by the US, could speed up this long-awaited collapse. The most immediate and impactful approach is to increase economic pressure, particularly targeting Russia's oil revenue, which remains a lifeline for Putin's war effort. Currently, Russia produces about 10% of the world's oil, which makes oil a significant source of funding for its military operations. In 2025, oil and gas revenues are projected to fall by around 3%, but even this modest decline will be painful for Russia if it's exacerbated by external pressure. The U.S. can use a combination of measures to disrupt Russia's ability to profit from oil sales, including sanctions on its shadow fleet of tankers that help Moscow evade oil price caps. As it stands, Western sanctions have already begun to cripple Russia's oil exports, but much more can be done. The Biden administration was well aware of this fact, so one of its last actions was to impose sanctions on over 150 individual vessels in this fleet. These sanctions are a direct hit to Russia's ability to transport oil, driving up cost and reducing revenue. But beyond targeting Russia's fleet, there's a pressing need to focus on key buyers of Russian crude, particularly in China, India, and Turkey. These nations continue to purchase Russian oil and refine it into products that are subsequently sold worldwide, funneling critical funds to Russia. By threatening to sanction these countries or their refineries if they continue to buy Russian oil, the U.S. could force them to reconsider their transactions. If these countries can no longer refine Russian oil, Russia's ability to profit from its energy exports will take a severe blow. One key economic indicator that has been fueling Putin's war machine is the global oil price. If Western nations, led by the U.S., significantly ramp up their oil production, as Trump has proposed, the global supply would increase, potentially driving down oil prices. With less revenue from oil, Russia would find it even harder to sustain its military expenditures. While this is a longer-term strategy, increasing production could substantially weaken Russia's ability to fund its war effort, providing another economic lever for the West to pull. At the same time, the U.S. and its allies can also ramp up sanctions that target Russia's financial and technological infrastructure. By further isolating Russian banks from the global financial system and limiting their access to advanced technologies, the West could create bottlenecks that slow down Russia's war machine. For example, tightening restrictions on high-tech exports, especially those related to defense and energy sectors, would leave Russia unable to maintain or develop the tools needed for both war and economic recovery. Despite potential challenges that come with these moves, many experts believe that the time for more decisive action is now. The longer the West waits, the longer Russia's war effort will persist, and the longer Putin will pretend that Russia's economy is thriving. For now, he's playing the poker game of his life, bluffing his way through an economic crisis while hoping the West buys the story. But even a seasoned player can't keep up a bluff forever. The cracks are simply widening too much. And while Putin's rhetoric might sound like a steady hand on the wheel, the truth is that he's starting to panic. As Reuters exclusively reported, Putin is increasingly worried about the distortions in Russia's wartime economy we covered in this video: labor shortages, rising inflation, and an unsustainable military budget. This worry extends into the Kremlin, where many officials are starting to see a negotiated end to the war as necessary. But here's where the problem lies. Putin doesn't want a deal. His stance has been clear from the start. He isn't looking for a face-saving settlement. The only deal he's ever been willing to entertain is the total collapse of Ukraine. After investing so much, over 830,000 soldiers and trillions of dollars, why would he settle for anything less than victory? Anything short of complete success would be an unacceptable loss for him. The only way to reach a deal is to back Putin into a corner. But do you think Russia's crumbling economy or its frustrated citizens have the power to make that happen? And if so, how much longer can Russia hold on? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into global politics and military analysis.